I'm going to recognize on Bill 312-32 LS.
Good morning and happy day, Madam Speaker, and to our fellow colleagues. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move for the placement of Bill number 312-32 LS, which is an act relative to appropriating the funds in the GMHA Healthcare Trust and Development Fund to the Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, pursuant to Public Law 32-060, by amending subsection B of section 97-103, Chapter 97, Article 1, Title 10, Guam Code annotated in the third reading for consideration by the body. With some discussion, please, Madam Speaker.
So it's the bill as introduced.
Correct, as introduced.
I don't have my copy here. Okay, Senator, yes, you may proceed. Yes, you may proceed. Oh, you didn't hear me. I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you for foregoing the requirement or waiving the requirement for the public hearing. I think we all have seen recent news with regards to Guam Memorial Hospital Authority needing additional resources, and the OPA's report that was recently released certainly highlighted some of those challenges. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank our colleagues for allowing this bill to be entertained in this session. And when we look at the history with regards to this proposal, Madam Speaker, the Chair of Health had introduced the public law that was highlighted a little earlier, 32-060, in which established a special fund. That special fund, 60% of those proceeds were to be allocated directly to GMH on a monthly basis. The remaining 40% were still subject to this particular body stepping in and providing those additional funds for purposes specified in the law. And if you take a look at the request, one of the requests from GMH officials has been on a repeated basis to have access to the balance of that particular fund, the remaining 40%. The good Chair of Health, I believe, will be providing some comments, and I thank him for contributing to this process. But, Madam Speaker, if we just extrapolate information with regards to what has been received by GMH from this particular fund. There was one article that I read that GMH had received approximately $373,000. There's another article that I read that, in fact, GMH had received an additional allotment in the month of May, and then as recent as the last week, an additional allotment. I have yet to receive confirmation from GMH officials about the second and the third allotment, but just based on $373,000 that has officially been received as of January of this year by GMH, we could extrapolate that there are approximately $248,000 in this special trust fund, the remaining 40%. And that is what we are looking at allocating based on Bill number 312-32 on a continuous basis, so that in fact GMH can have full access to the funds that are available through this particular special fund. So, Madam Speaker, I also want to just highlight that we understand the persistent challenges that GMH continues to endure every single year. And I remember several terms back when, in fact, this body had stepped forward and authorized GMH to go out and borrow $27 million. I also remember, Madam Speaker, that this body just very recently, last year, authorized GMH to go out and borrow up to $25 million, of which $14 million was for direct cash infusion to pay outstanding obligations. I share that history because this body has repeatedly stepped forward and extended support and assistance to GMH. And passing this legislation will once again highlight. But I also need to stress that this legislation will not fix the chronic financial challenges that GMH is presently undergoing and perhaps will continue to experience until such time that we're able to get solid recommendations in terms of how we can deal with their financial situation. So, Madam Speaker, any additional infusion of cash to GMH for their operations, for providing medical services to the people of Guam is something that we certainly need to try to lean forward and continue to support so that they can address providing those services in a safe environment and the best quality medical services that they can conceivably provide with any additional resources that can be extended by this body. So, Madam Speaker, I ask all of our colleagues to please consider supporting this legislation, and I understand that there may be some ideas in terms of expanding the provision. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. This is Master.
You're welcome, Senator Agon. On the motion, is there anyone else who would like to speak? Senator St. Nicholas, you're recognized, and Senator Adam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my perspective on this legislation is a little mixed. I fully support our hospital. We need to have it continue. I think that's very, very important. I need to be clear about that from the beginning. But when I read this bill, when I look at the realities of the hospital, and when I think of what this bill is going to do with respect to those realities, I'm very, very concerned. Right now, the way that we have the system set up is we have all of this money that's being accumulated and it's being held into a special fund. And that money cannot be spent by the hospital until the legislature gives it authorization to go ahead and spend it. We need to appropriate from that fund to the hospital for them to be able to spend it. And that amount is approximately $250,000, $250,000. What this bill will do is it will say whatever money goes in that fund can automatically go back out to the hospital to spend for whatever it needs to spend it on. And if I had confidence in management at the hospital, I would probably be okay with that. But based on what I've read in the media this morning and what I've been following over the course of the last term, my confidence in management at the hospital has eroded to the point where I no longer feel comfortable giving them this kind of authorization. Madam Speaker, it was very plainly stated in KUAM News that the auditor herself has raised concerns, substantial doubt, about the hospital's ability to continue as a going concern. Those are very, very important words to put into your mind, Madam Speaker. Substantial doubt about its ability to continue as a going concern. Let me put that into private sector perspective for a minute. If, as a financial advisor, I was going to invest my client's money, and I read a financial report about a certain company where their auditors said that they are substantially doubtful about their ability to continue as a going concern with respect to any company out there, I would be violating my fiduciary responsibility to my clients if I encouraged them to invest their money in that company. The ability to continue as a going concern is a serious financial statement that basically says any money coming into this operation is potentially going into a black hole. That's putting it into layman's terms, based on what the auditor's report is showing. So if I'm not going to invest my client's money as a financial advisor, how can I validate investing the people's money as their senator in an operation that is substantially in doubt? And I'm very, very, very disappointed in GMH management. It's already reached the point. I mean, the hospital administrator himself is so nonchalant about this issue. He says that, oh, this is no surprise. I'll tell you what's not a surprise to me, his reaction. I've been asking this guy, Madam Speaker, for over 2 years now, going on 2 years now. What is going to be the impact of the new hospital? What is going to be the impact of the new hospital? What is going to be the impact of the new hospital? Nothing. No response. Not even a best guess. And now we're having audit reports coming out and saying that they're a going concern. And now we have a bill that's going to try and give them authorization to just spend the money just to keep operating. Don't get me wrong. I want us to do everything we can to help the hospital to support itself. But there's a fine line between money and management, and where the success of the operation is going to fall is in between. Everybody needs the funds in order to operate, but you got to be able to manage what you got too. And if you cannot even come up with a best guess estimate as to what your main competitor is going to do to your operation within the next 60 days, how can I, in good conscience, authorize $250,000 of the people's money to go ahead and get spent for the operation again? And what about all the employees up at GMH? Now the entire operation has been put into this category of a going concern. If they were a private hospital, Madam Speaker, investors would be fleeing from this operation. If this was any kind of a private operation, their cost to borrow would be going through the roof. Their access to capital would be drying up faster than wet pavement on a hot sunny day. The existing structure that we're looking to change in this bill, Madam Speaker, provides us with a stopgap to say, now wait a minute, we're not going to authorize this money until we know what it's going to be spent on. This bill basically says, go ahead and take it for whatever you need to spend it on. Here are some of those areas where you can spend it on. If management was not as nonchalant as to just punt this off as being no surprise, then maybe I can say, yeah, you know what, I got to put more money into management's hands to be able to resolve this issue. But I don't see an end in sight, Madam Speaker. I've watched over the course of this last term how we've put millions and millions and millions more. Whenever we find extra money, we always say, okay, let's try and carve out a portion of it to go to Medicaid so we can get the matching funds to go into the hospital. We have done so much to put so much more money into the hospital. And I just haven't seen management do what it needs to do in order for the hospital to start turning itself around. And we have all these employees up there. We have all of our people who are dependent on those services. And it's just no surprise. Now the numbers, when you dig down deeper into it, just based on the good reporting from our island media, it's very frightening. In 2012, operating expenses was $103.5 million. In 2013, operating expenses was $103.6 million. Only $100,000 more. But the losses went from $17.8 million in 2012 to $33.7 million in 2013. How do you have the same expenses, but your losses double? Well, there's several ways. One, you're not collecting, or at least you're not collecting as aggressively as you're supposed to. Or two, whatever's making money in your operation, you're somehow outsourcing. But there's something grossly wrong here when your cost to operate is exactly the same, or more or less the same, but you're losing twice as much. And then you're going to come down here and you're going to say, in the newspaper, he's going to say, I've always said that unless the government fully funds GMH, there is a concern. What are you talking about? Your operating expenses are exactly the same. What are we not fully funding here? Your losses are double. I would proffer that unless GMH is properly managed, there is going to be a concern. How much are we talking about? How much money are we going to need to put up for this operation to succeed? I'd like a firm number. I'd also like to repeat again, maybe for the 9th time, what is going to be the impact of the new hospital opening? Are you going to expect a 30% reduction in revenues? 30% more on top of this loss already? Can I, in good conscience, authorize the spending of $250,000 more of the people's money when you cannot even, in good conscience, give me an estimate of how much your main competitor is going to suck away from your revenues? At what point? When? When? And I'm very, very confused with the state of the hospital, and the supposed state of our island. In the exact same newspaper. We have a huge article calling for 4 more years, and one of the successes listed here is continued improvements to our hospital. And a couple pages down is a very article, and in the media is the very story about that very hospital being able to continue as a going concern. So either things are really, really good, and this is an intentional, systematic dismantling of the hospital, or things aren't as great as they're purported to be. But either way, the bottom line, whether it is or isn't, is what do we need to do? How much is it going to cost? And where are we going to draw the line and say, this investment is going to cost us too much? This investment probably needs to be privatized. This investment probably needs to be closed down. And what are the different things that are just slowly taking us down this course? I remember reading in one of the reports that the losses, I think in 2009 was it? The losses was $9 million. Here, operating losses in 2009 went from 6 million, 6, to 34 million. 6 million in 2009 to 34 million in 2013. They're losing 5 times as much, and that's being advertised as a continued improvement. So, Madam Speaker, for me as a senator, and with respect to the need for us to be able to provide funding for the hospital, I'm all for that. I'd like to know exactly how much it's going to be. I'd also like to know what that's projected to be with the opening of the new hospital. I'd like us to get a real firm number on what subsidizing the operation is going to cost us, really cost us, not nickel and dime us to the point where we're having millions and millions of more being spent and we still don't have any answers, but really cost us. 30 million, 40 million, 50 million? What's the magic number for us to be able to say the hospital is no longer a going concern? And that's where management has a huge opportunity. Because if you're able to turn a going concern around into a successful operation, you are manager of the century. Some of the most successful investors and managers are those that are able to take these going concerns and turn them around into huge successes. This is management's opportunity. But I just don't see them taking us down that course. All I keep saying is that there's no surprise here. Oh my goodness. Those kind of statements. If that was a manager in a private operation, they would be out on the street tomorrow by their board. Or activist investors would unite and take a seat on the board and move that manager out. You don't say those kind of things and act like it's no big deal. And we're not just talking about any kind of private sector operation here, Madam Speaker. We're talking about the People's Hospital. If I was on that board of these kind of statements, I'd ask for his resignation. So, I rise in objection to Bill 312. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Tom Addott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In listening to the preceding speaker, I share his sentiments to a large extent. And just based on especially the audit that was just recently completed, in as much as we want to keep that hospital afloat, it seems that we're just basically pouring money into a leaky bucket. And when we have a situation like that, I think it's our responsibility to maintain really closer watch of that operation by maintaining this requirement to come to the legislature to be to have that money appropriated, at least the 40% that has not yet, that requires appropriation. The other concern that I have is really the purposes for which, and I know that in the existing legislation it establishes what the remaining 40% of the funds is to be used for. And it talks about it's to be used as a local matching for the Medicaid program. Well, certainly that, I think, is pretty much defined, and I think we can understand what that, the use of the funds with respect to providing matching funds for the Medicaid program. I think I can understand that. But it's also to be used to free up cash flow for other expenses of the authority. Funds from this item may be used as additional debt service payments for an existing borrowing by the authority. And it seems that if in fact, well, the hospital was in fact authorized to go out and borrow the order of, I believe, what, $27 million plus other borrowings, when the authority went out to make those borrowings, funds had to be identified as to how the debt service was going to be satisfied on those borrowings. And my understanding is that the amount of money that's really coming in from the source, from the license fees and whatever fees are associated with gambling operations out there, is really not as great as it was thought it would be. So to take this money and allow that it be used to, further supplement the debt service requirements, I believe is like taking, a BB gun to bring an elephant down to its knees. Another use for the funds is to establish new funding for the establishment of new revenue-generating medical services. And when you take a look at really what Part A of the law says, it says that 60% of the funds from the gambling sources will go towards basically establishing the foundation for an urgent care medical center. So as I look at that third use of the funds, certainly this money, additional money, can be used so that now you have 100% of the funds going towards the establishment of the urgent care medical center. It could happen. Whether that's their intent, I don't know. And then the fourth purpose of the fund is to fund for medication, supplies, and medical equipment. And there's many times that we've read in the local media that the hospital is short on supplies, short on medication. And so certainly that need is very clearly, much more clearly defined than the uses of the funds in items 2 and 3. Just recently, the media made a big to-do about the equipment that was donated by Naval Hospital. I think they had that an X-ray machine, and I don't know what else. But as I understand it, it's still sitting in the hallway because they can't find $200,000 to install the equipment. And so the other day I met I was at the change of command ceremony at the Naval Hospital, and I met the administrator, and I asked him if you guys found the money to install the equipment. And he says, I'm waiting for you guys to appropriate it. Well, as far as I know, I haven't seen any requests that has come down to the legislature asking for additional funds so that they can install the equipment. And so, I would rather that if this money is going to be appropriated, it really should be something for something more defined. This bill would probably get the votes that it needs to pass. I certainly am not in support of it. However, I think with an amendment, then I may be more willing to support it. And that is then on page 2, I would move to strike subparagraphs 2 and 3, to delete the use of the funds to be used for additional debt service payments, and to delete on item 3 there the use of the funds for the establishment of new revenue generating medical services. And therefore what it leaves is that the funds will be available to use for either local matching funds for the Medicaid program and funding for medication, supplies, and medical equipment. So that, Madam Speaker, my motion is to strike lines 4 through 8 and delete it from the bill.
On the amendment, which is on page 2, from lines 4 to 8 to delete. Is there anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? Senator Yamashita. Tom, can you please check the mic?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if the mover of the amendment would yield to a question, and the question is this: if the original measure was to help open up the urgent care, one of the reasons was to open up the urgent care services at GMH, and if we do delete number 3, I'm thinking that the establishment of new revenue-generating medical services really can be defined as urgent care. Or I might be wrong, but I'm wondering if that is a possible conflict.
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Well, that certainly is how I would interpret that, that then this 40% can be used to add to the money that's already been allocated for the urgent care center. So that then now what you have is 100% of the gaming revenues going towards the establishment of the medical center. I don't know. I mean, that's a speculation on my part.
Senator, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Speaker. So then perhaps we need to find out if that would be in conflict with the statute, which says that the funds from the gaming would go towards supporting the urgent care facility. I mean, and if this doesn't conflict, then I can support it. But if it does conflict, then it doesn't make sense to me.
I think there are the members who may be able to respond to your question. So, Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just as a point of information, Madam Speaker, the concern of the retiring speaker is legitimate. However, I believe, and it was the intent of this body when this original measure was passed, is that the initial 60% is dedicated towards the urgent care center, the establishment of the urgent care center, and that this section here, which this bill references, only deals with the 40%. And so if this amendment to delete these provisions pass, then I don't believe the establishment and the use of 60% will be in jeopardy.
Thank you very much for the information. Mr. Vice Speaker.
I was trying to remain quiet, Madam Speaker, but I cannot in good conscience remain quiet and have my no vote on this bill unexplained. I support the hospital. We have made some very good investments there. I was up there, I saw the new CCU, and it rivals anything that I've seen in the States. I saw the renovated former ER, which I understand may become the new urgent care, and it was beautiful. But then the administrator also took me into the brand new emergency room. And I saw something in there, Madam Speaker, that I don't even think would be in the hinterlands of the worst, of the poorest third world country in the world. This was a brand new ER that we had spent several $million on, Madam Speaker. And when I walked through the door, I almost walked into a contraption, and I can only call it a contraption. I've shared the photographs with all of you. And you all know that I'm a media hog. I would have loved to have released that 2 weeks ago, the first day that I saw it. But I was awaiting the return of the chair of the committee in the hopes that we would have an oversight before we decided to put one more penny into this hole. Madam Speaker, in this brand new ER between two bays is a wall air conditioner, and the exhaust is caught and funneled into the drop ceiling. It's not funneled out of the building, Madam Speaker. It's funneled into the false ceiling, and we know it'll come down throughout this whole brand new ER. That's exhaust. That's carbon dioxide in a room where there's oxygen tanks. If that wasn't enough, this wall air conditioner sitting in the middle of the room, not in a wall, on a rolling cart, has the dirtiest set of towels and sheets under it with a pot to catch the water. And the floor surrounding it, Madam Speaker, is filthier than any of us would have in our outside kitchen, in our garage. And this is in the emergency room with people coming in with life-threatening diseases. I would love to appropriate more money to the hospital, but I cannot appropriate any money to a hospital at this point where the management team, with as much money as they're making, could not have decided that maybe they don't have an appropriation for a stand-up air conditioner, but someone should have gone to Home Depot and bought one of those for $600 or $700. Someone could have called GIAA and borrowed one of the air conditioners they had when the air conditioning was down. No. They MacGyvered this wall air conditioner into the middle of the floor between two bays. And the day that I was there, Madam Speaker, both bays had a patient in them. That floor was so filthy, I'm surprised they didn't all get MERS. When I asked why, they said it was a mechanical engineering problem and the air conditioner was not strong enough to cover both the old ER and the new ER. All right, I accept that. And I accept the fact that they're in the protest. But someone should have found some way to, out of their own pocket, or borrowed a GIA, their machine, but not have that in there. There's people on oxygen, and there's carbon dioxide exhaust from the air conditioners floating in the false ceiling. And there's bacteria and unbelievable mold growing on the floor. You saw the photographs, Madam Speaker. The floor was the color of the wall behind you. I cannot in good conscience appropriate 1 more cent to the hospital until the administration grabs a hold of that board and has them go on a tour and realize that it's time that this administrator needs to go. And the floor, Madam Speaker, when I asked, I said, all right, even if I were to overlook the air conditioner, the condition of the floor, you guys have been open less than 4 months. A public bathroom in one of the schools is cleaner than what that floor looked like that day. And when I asked for the tour, one of the other senators that was there earlier with me in the conference room said, you should have not said anything and sprung it on them because now they're going to go try to clean up. And yes, as I walked through, some guy was trying to pick up trash, but they had not mopped the floor, and I can't even imagine if it had ever been mopped. Their excuse was that the contractor didn't seal the floor with the right kind of sealant or wax. But I won't even say, we can, as Chamorro sometimes joke about something being so, but I won't even insult any area of the island by saying it was just red dirt on the floor. It's unconscionable, unacceptable. And until something is done about that, it should not get another cent until they get brought in and asked the questions of why they allowed this brand new multi-million-dollar emergency room to allow to be in this absolutely horrendous, unsanitary condition. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Mr. Vice Speaker. On the amendment, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm listening very intently to some of the comments that are being shared by our colleagues. And they're all very legitimate issues or perspectives in terms of trying to find out exactly how GMH, our public hospital, will be able to continue operating beyond the end of this year when the new hospital opens up. We also heard of a very descriptive situation in the brand new emergency room, where in fact the air conditioning duct apparently was temporarily fixed. And Madam Speaker, it is for those very reasons that this legislation was brought forth to this floor. It's not this idea about, okay, let's deal with management. We're not going to give you any more resources because guess what, Madam Speaker? That is our one and only public hospital. That is where the people of Guam go to who otherwise are not able to receive treatment elsewhere. So for me to stand here knowing full well that there's money in this special fund, of which 40% has been set aside by law in this special fund and is sitting there. I don't even know if it's earning interest, but it's sitting in that account. And the law says that eventually it is allocated, or it specifies that it will be allocated directly to GMH for 4 particular purposes. But it's subject to concurrence and appropriation by this body. That's what we're doing with this legislation, Madam Speaker. We are allowing the usage and the direct access by GMH administration. Whether in fact we're going to question their management abilities, to me it's not a discussion for today. The discussion today is whether in fact they can continue to operate that facility and provide the best medical services to our people. That, I think, is the underlying issue of why, Madam Speaker, I asked you to forego the public hearing. That is exactly why I asked our colleagues to please consider placing this on the agenda. Whether it's $100,000 or $500,000, it's $500,000 more that GMH management will be able to utilize to perhaps address some of the issues that have been brought up. But you know, Madam Speaker, I'm not going to disregard these concerns because they're very legitimate concerns. But right now, we have heard pleas from hospital administrators that in fact they need additional resources. One concept that was mentioned a little earlier was that GMH in April had received 2 major medical equipment from their partner entity, Naval Hospital. April, May, June. 60 days later, and as recent as this past week, the hospital administrator has said that he doesn't have $200,000, and that's just an estimate, but he does not have $200,000 to install that equipment to provide the appropriate medical services to our people. That's what we're talking about here, Madam Speaker. We're talking about making sure that as we try to address the financial management of GMH, as we try to address how that facility operates beyond this year, as we try to address other components of how that hospital is operating, we have, to me, we have no choice but to give them the resources. Now, if we want to be more specific, then I understand that. But I believe the 4 sections already highlights where the resources could go to. And the amendment on the floor that is being proposed to be deleted, I believe, is sub-item number 2. In an effort to free up cash flow for other expenses of the authority. That's a segment of the sentence that will be deleted. In an effort to free up cash flow for other expenses of the authority. So if you free up cash flow, guess what? They're able to get some of those medical supplies, those medical equipments, and provide the appropriate medical service to our people. Madam Speaker, I go back to the whole idea of this bill. It's not a whole new appropriation. It's money that is supposedly sitting in an account waiting for this body to act and to give the money or the authorization for GMH to immediately have access to that. So if that's the case, if the money is in the account, sitting and waiting for this body, which rightfully has that authority, then, Madam Speaker, I'd say we need to do our job. But in terms of holding officials accountable, I understand that that is also a legitimate concern, but let's not impede or let's not negatively affect the services that need to be provided to our people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator Uggan. Senator McCready on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, after listening to all the colleagues in here speak about the management and the appropriation and the revenue stream and the cleanliness of the new emergency room, and listening to the author of this bill, who I support, is just because we feel that the management is not standard for the course. So we can't turn off the spigot, and we cannot stop funding these guys. I mean, it's part of our job. And listening to all these concerns, we have oversight of this hospital. And before we go any further with any type of negative comments, we should allow the hospital to come in here and explain. So, Madam Speaker, the only thing that we should be doing right now is going into committee as a whole and getting these questions answered. Because it's easy for us to sit here and judge the hospital without them sitting right here and explaining. We're asking the hospital questions like, what is the impact when a new hospital comes? And Senator St. Nicholas asked that question, and that's a very good question. But if we're not getting an answer, I think we can make that projection ourselves. And it's not going to be good for the old hospital when the new hospital comes in. But why not bring the experts here to explain to us? We are the oversight committee. Let them answer those questions. So why not make a motion? We're sitting here deciding what we should do with the hospital. Why don't we bring the hospital in here and work with them and find out what the problems are, how to close those gaps, and where this money should go? So I believe, and I want to make a motion to go into committee as a whole.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if that's a motion that the senator's proffering, then that's certainly a motion that's in order. If we're going to do that, then I suggest that we set Bill 312-32 aside and we proceed with 316. There are people next door that are here regarding the Vice Speaker's bill to raise the minimum wage, and it's an issue that the community is also tracking. And so if you're suggesting that we go to committee of the whole for this bill, I'm suggesting that we set this bill aside, entertain the next bill on the agenda, and that we alert the GMH officials that at 2 o'clock this afternoon, this legislature, provided that this motion is made and is passed, will go into committee of the whole for that particular purpose. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So my motion is to go into committee as a whole.
One moment.
No,
first.
if you're going to make that motion, my motion is to set this bill aside and that the Speaker navigate us to Bill 316.
But before we do that, I'd like to allow the chairman to speak. Senator
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Senators, one moment, please. Yes, take your conversation outside then. Thank you.
Thank you. I too appreciate the discussions we're having here today. However, I think if we just stay focused on what the intention is of Senator Uggan in his bill, is just to appropriate that 40%. We can have, and I know we have, legitimate questions for the Guam Memorial Hospital management, and that can be easily done. I'll commit to calling a hearing next week, to bring them in and to have these conversations. But I think to really focus in on what this measure is about, it's about freeing up that 40%. And we've heard, we've heard here this morning, Madam Speaker, that this money, the revenue that's being generated, is not the amount which we expected. I've been hearing that, Madam Speaker, but I want to ask anyone here to answer, what was that amount that was being expected? Because the problem we're having here is not the collection of the revenue. The revenue is coming in. A few sessions ago, this body appropriated from the same funding source, from the same gambling devices, funds that went to sports facilities. And we had no problem doing that, Madam Speaker. We hear also this morning, Madam Speaker, that if this was a private company, you would have the investors, the board, calling for the resignation of the manager for not allowing these things to happen. Madam Speaker, our hospital cannot be compared to a private company. If that's the case, for private companies to face the same responsibilities and mandates as placed upon GMH, then it's DOA, dead on arrival. The hospital must take in people, our people, regardless of their ability to pay. And so, if we stay focused, Madam Speaker, on what this bill is about, it's about freeing up money that's already been paid into the Treasury to go to GMH. Since the inception of this law, Madam Speaker, there's about over $1.2 million that was collected. And all we hear is this 200,000, 300,000. The problem here, Madam Speaker, is that the money that's being paid to this government is not getting to where it's supposed to go. That's the problem. That's where we got to get. If we want to go committee of the whole, that's who we got to bring in. Is DOA, Revenue Tax, to find out why is this money not getting into the hospital's hands when it's supposed to.
So
So
you're
I
objecting
I would
to
object to that, and I would commit
motion.
to calling a hearing on the hospital sometime next week.
So since there is an objection,
I withdraw my motion with the chairman's commitment to have a hearing. I trust.
so
and I
there's no
look forward to the
objection
hearing,
then
and I
to the
thank him.
withdrawal of his motion to set aside and go into committee of the whole. No objection? So ordered. So we're back to the Senator Tom Adda's amendment. And you're right, Senator McCready, you had spoken. Senator Munya-Barnes, you're recognized.
Si Diyos Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I sat here listening to all the speakers that got up to present their concerns, and as I look at wanting to speak on the main motion, the amendment to come up was to delete sections 2 and 3. Madam Speaker, when Public Law 32-060 came into play, we had long conversations on how this was going to be addressed and how the funding from gambling devices were going to be utilized. And in that time, there was a set of items or a journey on how we were going to utilize that funding. The oversight chair told you that since the inception of receiving the collections from those devices, that they have collected over $1.2 million, and that in that collection, the only holdup is having this body see how that funding was going to get through. I also heard, Madam Speaker, that because the collections have been received, it was an administrative venue of how that money gets sent from one agency to another. Madam Speaker, I understand the concerns of my colleagues and understand where this manager of the hospital continues to say, oh, we're just waiting for the money for you. My advice to him was to adapt, improvise, and overcome, because with what he has today, if I were managing that, I would have said you wouldn't even have to look far to help get those machines implemented from a gift that was given to Naval Hospital by just looking at the nonprofit organization that sits in the hospital to be able to help get some resources to make that machine work. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry. As everybody in this room knows and understands, I'm sorry. Our hospital, our Guam Memorial Hospital Authority, has something that no other agency has something that is not within their control. And I'm going to say it over and over and over. Do I personally think that there may be a management problem there? I'm going to agree with all my colleagues. But Mr. Speaker, I'm going to say it over and over and over. I knew who the former chair was in the hospital. And that was somebody who was near and dear to me. And that individual said, this hospital has something that it cannot control. It cannot turn away any patient that goes through that door. Whether you have the ability to pay or not, we have a mandate that we cannot turn anybody away. And as we addressed this several months ago, or even a year ago, we put these provisions down. We delineated all these situations, and we made it a point that in order for that money to be utilized, that it came back for the authority. So when I saw the present bill as it was introduced, and I read the amendment, I too, Mr. Speaker, was really, really taken aback. And I said, you know what? Maybe if I speak on the main motion, because I know what the hospital's up against, that maybe I'll put a mechanism there or ask legal counsel to do an amendment to give that reporting requirements, to tell this administrator, guess what? You have a job. You can't keep saying, oh my God, we don't have the funding, and the legislature has to do it. Because I'm going to tell you, the legislature has done it time and time and time and time again. We always come. We always bail out the hospital. But if we cannot see the end in sight, we got creative and we found another resource. And we put these provisions in place. So I'm hoping that as we authorize this, that maybe on the main motion, that I would talk about maybe putting in a provision of the reporting requirements and making this administrator show what he's using and show what the hospital is doing as far as showing the accountability and transparency. Because I probably know that all those laws are in place, but I guess we have to reiterate it again. So, as I understand where the author of the amendment is to delete 2 and 3, I know that the bigger picture, Mr. Speaker, is that this hospital has a mandate that it can't turn anybody away, and they are going to be forever in debt. There's that saying, you can't take blood from a turnip, you can't squeeze blood out of a turnip. Well, I'm telling you, you can't get money from people who don't have it and people who go to that hospital. We continue as policymakers to fund every way we possibly can to make sure that this hospital has funding. I even gave a recent example and said that the Guam Memorial Hospital volunteers continue to give money to the hospital from their hearts. They fundraise and raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's something the administrator could have done because they're more than willing to give. Those women and some men that are in that nonprofit organization gives all the time. But every time I look at a hospital, our public hospital, and look at the laws, the policy making that is before us, in my heart, I always have to remember that there's a mandate that we can't turn anybody away, even those who cannot pay for the services that they receive because they so badly need it. So, as I have concerns with the amendment, I understand where the author is coming for. I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with him on that, but hoping that we can put some kind of reporting mechanism and have that oversight and put this administrator in his place, because you can't keep giving away the programs that the hospital makes revenues on. You have to be accountable for what's coming into that hospital. And I know that that hospital has programs that receive funding and receive additional revenues. And we've got to make sure that that is set in place. So thank you, Mr. Speaker, for at least sharing my frustration with the hospital, but knowing and understanding what we need to do. Sana Masi.
Thank you very much. Senator St. Nicholas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, a couple things need to be clarified just so that we all understand exactly what it is that we're debating here. This bill isn't just an act to appropriate a one-time appropriation for a one-time solution. It's a continuous authorization language. It basically says that the administrator is able to access these funds for these purposes at any time that money goes into the account. That is where I have a problem, because I have lost confidence in this management. I'm okay with appropriating to go and fix broken air cons. I'm okay with appropriating to go and fix itemized problems. I'm okay with appropriating so that we can say, okay, you know what? This is the people's money. That is the problem. Here's the money, and you go fix it. Because then we can make sure that that gets done. But right now, with what has come out with the audit and with the current financial state of the hospital, I'm not comfortable giving management full authority to just draw down from this account and spend it, even if we limit it to certain areas. I want to know exactly where the money's going and exactly what it's being spent on. You know, we talk about how we can't compare the hospital to the private sector, and that's correct. You know, it's not going to be a straight line comparison, but there are going to be qualities that we can look for and expect in our hospital. And one of those qualities is to make sure that the people's money that's being spent for that operation is being used for its best purpose. And right now, with the direction that things have gone from $9 million short to $30+ million short over the course of 4 years, that for me is going to require me to step back and say, I'm going to look at every single thing at this point. And I'm going to really make sure that the dollars that's going over there is going for the purposes intended. Because for us to continue declining at that rate, and what's amazing, Madam Speaker, is that ever since the Affordable Care Act, we've been getting a whole lot more in Medicaid funding coming in. So the Medicaid money is rolling in. We've been appropriating to get that Medicaid money. We've been getting the matching funds. It's gone from, I think, $20 million to $60 million over the course of the last several years. Money is rolling in, but the hospital is just hemorrhaging. And I listened over the course of the last couple of years, Madam Speaker, and, you know, what are you going to do about revenue generating? Oh, we're going to put more parking in. Wasn't impressed. But, you know, I said maybe they're going to do something internally. You know, maybe externally they're limited, but maybe internally they're going to start tightening things up. But operating expenses are exactly the same as they were a year ago. Losses have just doubled. So when we're trying to find good things that we can apply from the private sector into our hospital, one of those things is being an activist board member, an activist shareholder, or in my case, an activist senator, being a hawk about every single dollar that's going in there from now on, and making sure every single dollar is getting its highest and best use for the operation and for the benefit of the people of Guam. And in order for me to do that, I cannot support a bill that's going to allow them to just draw down from that account, even if it's for a limited number of purposes. That kind of privilege in expending resources is, for me, reserved for managers like Mary Okada up at UOG, who have proven that they can take resources and work wonders with it. I'm sorry, up at GCC, President Okada. So until management has earned that, I'm not going to support a bill that's going to grant them that, and I'm going to want to watch every single dollar that's going in there, every single one. And I'm going to want to watch it because I'm worried about what's over the horizon. I'm telling you, Madam Speaker, come January of next year, when the new hospital has gotten on its feet and customers are rolling over there instead of down to GMH, at least the paying ones, what are we going to do then? Mark my words. I've been raising this issue for over a year now. And this amendment is something that I can support because on item 2, what it says is, in an effort to free up cash flow for other expenses of the authority, funds from this item B may be used as additional debt service payments for any existing borrowing by the authority. Breaking it down, what we're basically saying is, The hospital administrator can take this money and use it to pay for the loans that the hospital has, so he can take other money from elsewhere and use it for whatever else he needs to use it for. That's an incredible amount of flexibility that we're giving a manager who has, to my determination, not demonstrated an ability to utilize free cash flow wisely. I support the amendment of taking that out. Use your free cash to pay your debts. Debts first. If you need an appropriation to go and implement an x-ray machine, absolutely. Because that way we can appropriate it, we can make sure the x-ray machine gets turned on. What next? But to say that we're going to give you an appropriation to pay your debts so that you can have the flexibility to use your free cash flow for whatever it is you want to use it for, I'm sorry. Your operation is a going concern. You're not surprised about that. And you want to use your free cash flow how you see fit? Not on my watch. At least not with my vote. And then the other item here, funding for the establishment of new revenue-generating medical services. You know, when your operation goes from a $17 million loss to a $34 million loss, you are not demonstrating your ability to generate revenue. It's pretty plain. So why are we going to give you continuous authority to access this funding stream to go and generate new revenue when you haven't even demonstrated your ability to work with what you got? I want to see the plan before you go and you tap that money for revenue generating opportunities. You want an appropriation to generate revenue? Show me the plan. This is the people's money. You show me the plan because you haven't demonstrated it yet. And while you're at it, show me the plan for how you're going to continue as a going concern when the new hospital opens. That will be wonderful. The line has been crossed, Madam Speaker, with respect to my trust in management's ability to deliver and with respect to my willingness to give them these kind of privileges in handling the people's money. I want to keep a firm thumb on that. And you know, Madam Speaker, it does work. Reverend Tax, under my oversight, has improved its collections by $10 million. Services are getting better up there. I'm seeing Facebook posts about it all the time. And what once was viewed as an uncomfortable exchange has now all of a sudden turned out to be, hey, you know what? This isn't a bad way of doing business. Let's look at where we are. Let's identify the areas we need to work on. Let's set the baseline and let's improve. Let's improve. Even if it's just a little bit at a time, let's at least work towards a continual state of improvement. That's not what this bill is expecting. This bill is the opposite. This bill is saying, here's more resources, do what you got to do. Not my style. You got what you got? You want more? We have the resources. Where is it going to get us? How are we going to measure progress? And let's move forward from there. So I support this amendment, Madam Speaker. Even if it passes, I don't know if I'm yet ready to support the bill because of the continuous appropriation language here on lines 8 through 11. I can support appropriating it for the remainder of the fiscal year, but going in the next fiscal year, maybe we need to be, no, not maybe, we absolutely need to be more hawkish on how we're going to be providing resources, only for the purpose of making sure those investments of the people's money are actually resulting in improvements. Because if this hospital has to close, then all those people who need help that can't pay, where are they going to go? And that's why it's important for us to do this, because we've got to keep it open. And all those people who work up there, where are they going to work? It's not like there's no need for them. There absolutely is. But when your operation is being rated as a going concern, how are you going to continue operating? And that's why we need to be like this, Madam Speaker. That's why I'm taking this position. And I hope that we can get management, either existing or new, similar to the management that we got up at GCC, the kind that we can really sit back and just say, wow, you know, what else do you need? How else can I get you more resources? Because you really know what you're doing. I can get behind that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Rodriguez, and then Senator Morrison. If there's anybody else, please let me know.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in objection to this amendment simply because, you know, what we've been trying to do here over the past few years is to provide support to the hospital, which we have. And I hear this morning, Madam Speaker, that there are issues, there are questions, there are concerns with the way things are being operated there. And I'll be very specific. There's concerns with how the manager, the CEO, is handling the operations there. And that, Madam Speaker, as I said earlier, will be addressed. We'll have an oversight hearing next week. But we can't punish the hospital. We can't punish what needs to be given to them because of that one concern, at least from this body. If you really want to do what some of the things I've heard said this morning in this hall, then maybe you should apply to be the administrator. But it's our duty and our responsibility here, Madam Speaker, is to provide the resources to the hospital. Yes, they've incurred a huge operating loss over the years. But just as I've been saying over the past few months, this year alone, the second quarter of this year, Medicaid was belly up. That's contributing to the problems at the hospital, Madam Speaker. And so I ask my colleagues for a little restraint. I understand and I appreciate their frustration. But Madam Speaker, this problem, the challenge we face at the hospital, unfortunately, it's going to be there. When the new hospital opens, it's going to get worse. And we've heard. They've not come up and said specifically what these effect is going to be at GMH, but they've said they can estimate, at least guesstimate, that at least 30% of the paying patients are going to go over to the new hospital. But it's hard for our hospital, our management at the hospital now at GMH, to figure out truly what the impact is going to be when they're not being told. The community, we know and we support a new hospital that's opening up here. But we don't know exactly what are the services, what is going to be done up at that new hospital. We know general terms on what they plan to do, but there's nothing specific. As recent as a few weeks ago, when GMH submitted its fee schedule here, we sat down and talked with third-party payers, with the private insurance industry. They too are clueless. They don't know what's happening. So it's very hard to make that determination of what that true impact is going to be. But rest assured, it will have an impact. We already see it now. We have human resources that are being pulled away from our hospital and being sent over to that new hospital. So there's going to be an impact. But Madam Speaker, we cannot punish the hospital because of things that are beyond our control in this body here. We know for a fact that the hospital is financially challenged. We know for a fact the biggest bleeding, the biggest hemorrhaging at the hospital is the ER department, the emergency room. And so that's why this body, earlier this term, has passed a law that we're amending here this morning that provides a way for them to establish an urgent care center there. Because we know that most of the patients that come into the ER room are not emergent cases, Madam Speaker, they're urgent cases. And when you're seen in an urgent care setting, the cost is lower. And that's why it's so important that we support the hospital, and it's, they've had a little delay in implementing that urgent care, but it's going to be implemented. But we need to really, I know there was concerns about it was going to be outsourced or someone was going to benefit from it. But really, if you really focus and look at what this is going to do, it's going to help the hospital long term. I've said it before and I'll say it again, is that for a service, if you come into the hospital to an ER room and it's not an emergent case, you can be charged anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 for that particular case. However, in an urgent care setting, you can be charged $1,000 or even less than that. It's just the way the operation works, Madam Speaker. And so by removing sections here, particularly item 3, funding for the establishment of new revenue-generating medical services, is that we take away that flexibility for the hospital to say, okay, now that 60% that we've appropriated, we have set aside and allocated, if that is not enough, at least for the beginning, at least for the startup, then they're able to have that flexibility and use these parts of this 40% to support that. And so I rise in objection to that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Morrison, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just feel pretty alarmed, Madam Speaker, that some members of this body can take it to another level and call for someone's resignation. It's kind of a first for me to hear that from this body, and it's very unfortunate. Madam Speaker, just last year, the hospital got its accreditation by the Joint Commission. I think we missed the boat on that news. And I think to call the administrator or out on some of the deficiencies are clear, but we also have to point to the fact that this hospital has been accredited for the next 3 years. And what that means, Madam Speaker, is it means that our hospital has met the highest level of care outlined by the Joint Commission that it does this accreditation. So we have to be careful, Madam Speaker, when we create this type of atmosphere out there that the administrator has certain issues with the floors and stuff like that. We don't have a perfect hospital, but according to the experts, we are not the experts. According to the experts, it is meeting the highest level of standards that it can provide care for our people. Now, getting to the amendment, Madam Speaker, I'm a bit concerned of how the direction we're taking with addressing this issue, and I don't want to contradict ourselves because the chairman's right. We did this a couple months ago, because what's outlined also in the current existing law is we addressed specific monies to 1/3 of these monies that, or going to 1/3 of the facilities throughout our government, from the Department of Parks and Recreation, DOE facilities, Guam mayor's facilities in the villages. So we addressed this, and I just find it that ironic, or we're contradicting ourselves, because we're going down the same road. I think the author is just trying to free this up, working with the chairman to allow the money to be used for the hospital. So again, Madam Speaker, as the chairman alluded to, that we stay focused on what we're trying to do and stay consistent of what we did in the past, and also recognize that our hospital is fully accredited. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. There is an objection to delete on page 2, lines 4 to 8. So all in favor of the deletion, please raise your hand. All in favor of the deletion. 1, 2, 3, 4. The amendment failed. On the main motion, Senator Ada, you still have the floor. You're okay. On the main motion, is there anybody else who would like to speak on the main motion? There being none, Senator Uggan, would you like to close? On the main motion?
On the main motion, I had a point of information, and maybe if I can request for a 30-second recess just to see regarding any reporting requirements as it relates to the bill on hand and the previous law.
Okay, we'll have a 42-second recess.
Okay.
The legislature is back in session. Senator Munya Barnes, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, after consulting with our legal counsel, I do want to note that there was a submission for the detailed report of expenditures by the hospital authority on a quarterly basis, so that answered my concern in reference to detailing how the funds is utilized. So that is already in existing law right now, so I appreciate the time that you've given me to work with legal on this. So thank you.
You were able to find out then that
there
the
is
quarterly report is in the law.
Right.
But then, of course, now the next question will be whether they're actually submitting a quarterly report.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Senator. On the closing then for Bill 312-32, Senator Frank Uggan, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Before I proceed with closing my comments, Madam Speaker, I'd like to request for the following individuals, Senator Rodriguez and Senator Tony Ada, to be subsequent co-sponsors, please, of the proposal.
On the motion, without any objections, so ordered.
And Madam Speaker, I'd like to also close with this one particular comment. And I thank our colleagues for the lively discussion in regards to some of the things that are taking place up at our public hospital. But you know, Madam Speaker, not too long ago, and I can say about 9 years ago, there was this little infant that came into this beautiful world and came in 3 months early. And over the course of 3-4 months, I watched the professionals and the nurses and the staff at GMH tend to that little infant. And because not too long ago, about 3 weeks ago, and I had an opportunity to spend a little time with that young boy. And Madam Speaker, today he's very much alive and very much well, thanks to the good Lord's blessings and thanks to the miracle workers at GMH. I share that because whether it took one additional medicine, whether it took procuring some additional equipment to keep this premature young boy, infant, alive for an extended period of time, that's what we need to continue to be mindful of in terms of the medical services that are being provided by our doctors, our nurses, and our medical staff up at GMH. You know, Madam Speaker, the concerns that have been raised are very legitimate concerns. Whether we get the financial report on a quarterly basis, I want to just thank the good chair of health for reaching out and saying, yes, we will have an oversight hearing. And these questions, you will be given an opportunity to ask these questions about how the resources are being expended, where they are being expended, what services are being provided, what new services may be provided over the next few months. And then hopefully, one of our colleagues would get perhaps a preliminary response of what the impact would be about with the existence and the impending opening of the brand new hospital facility. Those are all legitimate concerns, Madam Speaker. But this bill recognizes the existence of a special fund that has a balance of 40% in that special fund that rightfully is already earmarked to go to GMH. It only needs the authorizations of the members of this body to give that appropriation and the access of those funds so that GMH can provide the services, and in many cases, the miraculous medical services and treatment that they provide on a daily basis. And that's why I'm asking our colleagues to seriously consider supporting this legislation and give, even if it's less than $1 million, give whatever additional resources this special fund will provide to GMH, to the doctors, the nurses, and the staff. Then by all means, please, I ask our colleagues to seriously consider supporting this measure, and to all of our colleagues, I really am indebted for allowing the discussion, this particular discussion, to proceed. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion to send 312-32 LS to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Bill number 316-32, recognize the Vice Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that Bill 316, as substituted by the Committee on Natural Resources,
Rules, Federal, Foreign, and Micronesian Affairs.
Rules, Federal, Foreign, and Micronesian Affairs, Human and Natural Resources, and Election Reform, be placed in third reading, and I'd like an opportunity to speak.
You may proceed.
Madam Speaker, before I start on discussing the bill, I want to first thank my colleagues, and especially the Oversight Committee, for enduring well over 10 hours of public hearings. Many of you sat with me until 1 o'clock in the morning one time, a whole other afternoon. So I want to thank all of you for the interest that you've taken in sitting through the hearings and listening to the testimony. I want to also especially commend the committee for compiling the committee report. For those of you that went online and saw the committee report, he was very thorough. The committee was very thorough. There's over 700 pages in the committee report. And it includes every testimony that was delivered and received by email. And it even includes every letter to the editor in both newspapers that were published. So the committee was very thorough. I want to also thank the committee for including in the committee report the work that was done by my office in preparation for this. There's probably over 100 pages of charts and graphs, explanations and hyperlinks to hundreds and hundreds of stories that my office and I went through in preparation for this bill. This bill was not conceived on April 10th of this year at the Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce meeting. This bill began its deliberation in my mind and in my office's work late in 2010, when the then Governor Felix Camacho implemented the Hay Study for the government employees. At that time, I realized that the discrepancy in median average income between government employees and the private sector was getting more and more inequitable. And so at that time in late 2010, I started to consider this minimum wage increase, because the last minimum wage increase was in 2009. The problem that we had was, as you know, my office has some very brilliant young people, and we were engaged in all kinds of discussions and very heated debates about how we address this. There were staffers that insisted that we should do a CPI indexing scheme. But when we went through our calculations and we did the calculations of what the CPI increases have been since 1995 and starting upwards from the, well, no, I guess it was 1990 that the minimum wage increase was introduced, and then some other increases that have come subsequent to it. The CPI would have made the minimum wage on this island something in the neighborhood of $15 an hour. Even I could not have made that introduction. I realized that I'm pretty crazy, but that would be absolute suicide. I was thinking about the living wage. I have to admit that. But my staff talked me down from that one too. They said there was no way that I could possibly explain how I arrived at a living wage something in the neighborhood of $12 an hour. So we continued to do some more research. Thankfully, I have a very young staff, and they're very tech savvy, and they can go into the internet. And you would be surprised, Madam Speaker and colleagues, at the wealth of information that's contained on the internet and how much information the government of Guam publishes on a monthly, on a quarterly basis that you can look at to make informed decisions about what you want to do within this community. Our Department of Labor here publishes a quarterly report on employment. And it gives us a report of the number of people employed in the private sector, in the federal sector, in the Gov Guam sector, within the private sector, or in construction, in hotel, in retail, in every category, the number of people that are employed. It breaks down how much they're making per hour. My office staff went through and did a chart. They took every report that we could get from 2000 and started to chart them. Every quarterly report, what was the number of people employed? We looked at the 3 times in 2007, 2008, and 2009 when we implemented the minimum wage increases during those periods. We looked to see whether or not there was a concomitant decrease in employment. You look at that chart, and it's on the committee report. There was no concurrent decrease in employment during the 3 periods that the minimum wage was increased. There was a drop in 2010, 2011, a pretty precipitous drop. But I believe that happened when everybody realized that the buildup wasn't going to go forward. It had nothing to do with the imposition of the latest minimum wage increase. And since 2010, it has continued going up. For those of you who don't want to believe me or the reports, there are press releases that come out of Adelup over the last several months that have bragged about the fact that employment is up, the economy is up. During the last 2 years, Madam Speaker, I and my staff have been going through and mining all of this information. On the internet also, and I know that there are individuals in the committee room that are very interested in it. The Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association publishes a report. And in it, it lists how much the weighted room rates, what the number of occupants all kinds of information. How many people are employed where and what parts of the hotel industry they're employed and how much they're getting paid. It's unbelievable. It's very thorough, and I have to thank them for it. Because I went through and used the Hotel and Restaurant Association's own quarterly reports, Madam Speaker, and discovered that before the first increase in June of 2007, the revenue per room of hotel rooms was $59.81. And the average hourly rate for hotel workers at that time in 2007 was $7.27. After the last increase in August of 2009, the revenue per room, as reported by the GHRA reports, is $87.93 per room. And the average rate went from $7.27 in 2007 to $8.70 in August of 2009. A $1.40 increase. Since 2009, the last minimum wage increase, in December 13th, the GHRA report showed that the revenue per room went up to $114.61 per room. That's the weighted room rate. And in February of 2014, they reported that the average weighted room rate was $138.81. The room rates went up almost $70 per room, almost. The hourly rate went from $7.27 in 2007 to $8.70 in August of 2009, and in February of 2014, it went up to $8.79 an hour. That was from their own statistics. I know that a number of people in here are, that it's now being reported the sky is falling. This $1 increase that's being proposed is a 14% increase. 14%. My God. 14%. We're all going to go bankrupt. Correct. Admit, yes. For someone making $8.79, a dollar increase, for someone making $7.25 right now, a $1 increase to $8.25 is going to be a 14% increase. But a $1 increase for those of us in here that are making $30 an hour, that's 1/30th, and a dollar increase for us per hour would be 3%. For some people in the next room who are making six figures, a $1 increase for their $50 an hour that they're making is a 2% increase. My office was also able to take advantage of the fact that the press releases from the governor's office pointed us out to a great report that was online and that the governor touted to show that the economy is absolutely wonderful. In April of this year, the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Census, issued their report about the income and expenses of all of the businesses on this island in the calendar year 2012. That's the latest year they have, 2012. It was published on April of this year for 2012. The governors rightfully should be proud of the fact that in 2012, the public sector total value of sales, receipts, shipments, or business done in 2012 was $7,736,833,000. Almost $8 billion. So yes, business out there is doing well. That same report published by the U.S. Department of Labor, and Madam Speaker, I also should mention that I'm very proud of our business sector here on this island, because when U.S. Department of Labor sends out its survey, according to Gary Hiles at the last SCS, Guam is phenomenal in that 90% of businesses that receive the survey request from the U.S. Department of Labor respond. So this number was from what 90% of them responded, how much their sales were for the calendar year 2012. That same report tells us that the total operating costs, and operating costs included everything: payroll, operating costs, taxes, everything. Total operating costs was $3,316,977,000. That same report for 2012, shows that total payroll cost of 90% of the private sector, total payroll cost out of that $3 billion, total payroll cost was $1,287,327,000. So, Madam Speaker, let's put this dollar increase into perspective. If we pass this bill today, from all the reports that I've been able to, and my office is able to find, there are currently about 7,840 private sector employees who are making below $8.25 an hour. Some of them aren't making a full dollar below, some are making $8, but whatever. We'll just say that those of all the employees in the private sector making less than $8.25 an hour, there's 7,840 of them. If we give them their $1 increase, and if they worked 2,080 hours a year, which they won't because many of them don't, because of the fact that if you make them work more than 37 hours a week, you have to provide benefits. So many of them are getting are only working 35 to keep them under that threshold. But if they were to, by chance, that would mean that this $1 increase would cost $16,307,200. And I quoted the other studies, the other numbers earlier, Madam Speaker, because if you take this $16 million and you put it against total operating cost, 16 million out of 3,300,000,000 comes out to an increase of 0.49%, less than 0.5% of total operating cost. And some may say, well, it's unfair. Unfair. You shouldn't use it against total operating cost. All right. Let's take that 16 million against the total payroll cost. Payroll cost is $1,287,000,000, or 1.3 billion. That 16 million against the 1.3 billion comes out to an increased payroll cost of 1.27%. Nowhere near the 14% the sky is falling. I think it's important that we get those numbers out there. And I think it's important that everybody realize that I didn't just do this willy-nilly. During the last 2 years, while we were compiling all the information, I was consulting with the 5 economists that I know on this island. 2 with a PhD up at UOG, 1 at the Bank of Guam, 1 at Department of Labor, and 1 at Bureau of Labor Statistics. I showed them the graphs that we had. I explained the numbers that we had. We sat down and talked to them. I wanted to get their feel about how this was going. And as was explained by a radio personality the other day, talking to an economist sometimes can be a little exasperating. You know, you ask them what time it is, and they explain to you how the little dials turn, and how this does this, and all this, and you're still not, after an hour with them, I'm trying to figure out exactly, did they say they would support me in the event that I proposed a minimum wage increase or not? But I went to each one of them several times over the last 2 years, trying to have them understand what we were finding in our research. As of April this year, I still really didn't know for sure whether or not, if I were to propose a minimum wage bill, whether or not I would get the support of the economists in this community. As the fates would have it, the Guam Women's Chamber of Commerce decided they were going to have a conference on gender inequality in payroll. And for those of you that took the time to read the speech that I delivered, it had very little to do with the minimum wage increase. It had everything to do with addressing gender inequality in pay. At that conference, I opened up with, I want you all to remember 3 things. 44% of the private sector workforce are women, but more than half the workforce working below poverty level are women. That 12,000 of them are at the poverty level. And of that 12,000, 6,000 are women. And almost 3,000 of them are women raising families by themselves. So I went off on this whole thing. But, digress a little. When we had that conference that morning, the 5 economists spoke before me. Dr. Owain spoke about the need to address inequality by raising the minimum wage. Dr. Jones, an economist, suggested we go to the living wage. Gary Hiles, the Department of Labor economist, spoke in favor of an increase. And Joe Bradley from the Bank of Guam also spoke in favor. I was supposed to be the next speaker, but my 60 pages of PowerPoint presentation wasn't on the machine yet, and they were going to put me at the end of the program. I said, forget it. I don't need the PowerPoint. I need to follow this crescendo of 4 economists publicly stating their support for an increase in the minimum wage, and one of them even suggesting that we go all the way up to the living wage. So I quickly delivered my speech, and during my speech, I added something that wasn't in my speech. I said, in light of the fact that these 4 economists have now publicly announced their support for this minimum wage increase, I am here announcing that I will drop in the legislative hopper a bill to increase the minimum wage. At that time, on April the 10th, I didn't have a bill written. It wasn't that it needed to be a 30-page bill, Madam Speaker. You saw the original bill in 316. It was less than a page. It took me a couple of days to get around to putting it together. But when I had those 4 economists make those presentations, I thought this was the perfect time. The press was there, they heard it. And so I dropped the bill. Yes, we've had over 10 hours of public hearings. And yes, most of that testimony in the public hearing was opposed to the bill. I'll be honest. A great majority of it was opposed to the bill. But I am confident in the research that I have done, in the research that my office has compiled, and in the research and discussions that I've had with the 5 economists on this island to understand that this 1.7% increase in payroll costs will not send us into a major recession. Quite the opposite. An additional $16 million in the hands of the least paid on this community will immediately turn around and be spent the retail stores, and the restaurants, paying bills. I don't know if any of them have financial advisors that have them investing in stocks. I doubt. I mean, maybe some do. But most of that, $16 million in new increased salaries, will be spent in the economy. And we've seen over the last couple of years how all the income tax refunds that were sent out, that immediately turned around into increased corporate taxes. GRT has gone through the roof. People are spending it. But the inequality continues, Madam Speaker. Since I introduced this bill, the government of Guam has implemented the Competitive Wage Act, or the Hay Study. Since I've introduced this bill, the public safety increases 40% has been fully implemented. In our last session, we appropriated additional money to make sure that everybody's 40% is paid. Though the governor vetoed Bill 309, we tried to find additional money to make sure that we paid the hay for the rest of this year, and tried to cover the judiciary for their hay, and everybody. We even passed a resolution asking the Congresswoman to make sure that we take care of our government of Guam DC employees to be able to parachute into the Social Security system. But we've not taken care of the 23,000 employees that day in and day out are the cogs that run the machinery that runs the economy of this island, the tourism and retail industry in this island. We've not addressed them. I'm embarrassed. And so I want to thank my colleagues for the offer of, at least right now, to agree to a $1 increase, and then we'll see where we get after January 15th. You know, Madam Speaker, that I'm not the best child in the sandbox. That I can sometimes be pig-headed and insist that it's my way or no way. But this is not something that is for me that I can refuse to accept or not accept. This will immediately, on January the 1st, assist 7,480 private sector employees with a $1 increase, which could translate into about $2,000 a year. I cannot in good conscience spur the offer that was made by the good minority leader for the $1 increase and insist that I had to have the 2016 and 2017 increases also. I'll deal with that bridge when we cross it. Hopefully it'll be like it was when I got the one increase in 2005. The federal government passed legislation and did the 3 increases that I initially wanted, and earlier than I had proposed it. But I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that right now, and I have to do whatever I can to at least help these 7,480 individuals and their families. So I thank my colleagues for that offer, and I accept it. I could go on even longer, Madam Speaker, but I've spoken about this. I've written to all of you. I've pointed it out in the committee reports. I've sent out letters. That besides my office, the Guam Women's Chamber website that has the testimony of everybody that spoke at that, and all the reports that my office constantly generates on this issue. It's stats. I could go on for about 5 hours, but I won't. I think I have shown that this $16 million increase for 7,480 individuals translates to 1.2% increase in payroll cost, not the 14% the sky is falling. So before I sit, Madam Speaker, before we started session this morning, I understand my colleagues have spoken to members of the industry and are willing to do without the section on the study. And so rather than spend any time on fighting over the study, and limiting this debate to whether or not we support a $1 increase, I move that this section 2 on the independent economic assessment be deleted.
On the amendment to delete section 2, hearing no objections, or?
All right. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since I don't have to spend any time on that one, I hope that I've given all of you enough information by which we can, and I hope for your unanimous support of this 3-line bill. Thank you very much.
On the main motion, are there any others who would like to speak? On the motion then to send 316-32, I'm sorry, okay. Senator Lim Tiapo, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to this bill simply because what we're attempting to do here is arbitrarily increase wages without considering the fact that there needs to be a corresponding productivity that's associated with that. And all of us were at the public hearing. And for the most part, the testimony that we've heard tonight didn't address any of the business community's concerns that were raised. The retiring speaker pointed out that majority of that testimony that came from the business community was in opposition to the increase in the minimum wage. These are the businesses that pay corporate income tax, that pay GRT, that employ and pay payroll taxes, that help contribute to the government coffers. And they're speaking loudly and they're speaking clearly and they're saying, this is what we're going to do if you raise the minimum wage. And what they said at the public hearing was very clear. The same 7,480 minimum wage earners that the retiring speaker says is going to benefit from this minimum wage increase are the same people that this increasing the minimum wage will hurt. Not once, nowhere in that committee report that was published, answered the question as to who is going to pay for it. Who is going to pay for it? And that the answer to that question, Madam Speaker, is is widely spread. It's not just the business community. It's the very people that this legislation is intending to assist. Raising the minimum wage will have a negative effect on employment. It's very simple math. We heard a lot of facts and figures that the retiring speaker has thrown out, yet nobody has addressed the fact that somebody has to pay for it, and it's going to come in the form of either reduced hours, reduced unemployment, as well as other ramifications, Madam Speaker. Employers cannot afford to fully absorb an increased mandated wage rate. What they will do is they will offset that by cutting their workforce. They need the labor to successfully run their businesses. This is very clear. It's just a basic profit and loss scenario. It's very simple, Madam Speaker. Businesses cannot afford to pay the employees more than the employees produce on the aggregate. You expect that productivity to translate into corporate profits. Corporate profits is not a bad word, Madam Speaker. That's what allows businesses to reinvest in the businesses, to grow and expand their businesses, to survive. All along the way, paying GRT, corporate income tax, and payroll taxes. The same companies that stand to employ these people. You know, when you look at it, most minimum wage earners work for small businesses rather than large corporations. We don't have very many large corporations here on Guam. The previous speaker cited studies, mainly of which was his own study, his own internal study. Well, there's studies to be had, and the retiring speaker also referred to all the studies that are on the internet. Absolutely, there's been numerous studies on this. One such study, according to analysis of the Employment Policies Institute, roughly half of the minimum wage workforce is employed at businesses with fewer than 100 employees. 40% work at businesses with fewer than 50 employees. Sounds a lot like businesses on Guam. If you look at one of the largest sectors of our economy, our tourism industry, just think about how many minimum wage earners work in that industry and the corresponding effect that it's going to have when the minimum wage is increased. How many people will lose their jobs? What will happen to prices? There was a correlation that the retiring speaker referred to, that there were an actual increase in wages and a corresponding increase in room revenue. That's the exact same direct correlation that's going to have with a further increase in the minimum wage. You will see prices increase. So who's going to pay for it? The tourists are going to pay for it, if they're willing to pay for it. If they're not willing to pay for it, Madam Speaker, what effect will that have on our tourism industry? Will they seek other destinations that are more economical? Will they reconsider whether or not they'll come to Guam and choose another destination? Ultimately, who will pay for it then? The government of Guam, the citizens of Guam, our people, because that will correspond into a lack of revenue or a reduction in revenue for our government. Now, there's been several studies about this minimum wage. One such study, a California chapter of the National Federation of Independent Businesses, projected that the potential negative effects of the state's 2013 legislation that raises California's minimum wage rate from $9 an hour to $10 an hour is estimated to increase the wage rate, which shrink the economy by $5.7 billion in the next 10 years and result in approximately 68,000 jobs being cut from the state. It further projected that 63% of the estimated 68,000 jobs lost would be from small businesses that could no longer afford to pay their employees. It's the same correlation here on our island, Madam Speaker. It's no different. The bottom line is that someone must pay for the costs associated with the increased minimum wage. Often because businesses cannot pay these costs. They are paid for by the individuals the minimum wage is intended to help. And I can't reiterate this enough. The same exact 7,480 people that this bill attempts to help will be those that are most negatively affected by that. The low-skilled, entry-level jobs, people just trying to get their feet wet to gain a skill, because they will lose the job opportunities. When you talk about economics, and I'm surprised that the testimony that we're largely pinning this bill on is a testimony of 4 economists, as opposed to a panel of businesses, a panel of business leaders that will tell you what would they do when faced with an increased cost, especially those that rely heavily on labor as their main component. That's really where you should have got your input. That's really what you should have addressed in the committee report. Instead, we ignored the business community. Largely, the public hearing in which most of the business community came out was just a procedural thing. Because if we listened to them, this bill would have had a different iteration, if not introduced at all. Simple economics, Madam Speaker: increasing the price of a good or service decreases demand for that good or service. If you increase the price of a lower skilled worker, I'm just going to consume less of it. I'm going to go find someone that can produce more. It was funny that during the public hearing, a line of questioning on a very prominent business person, basically at the end of the testimony, said the exact same thing. What would you do if you had a person that was employed by you that was not producing at the wage rate that you're paying? The answer, Madam Speaker, was, I would fire them. That's exactly what's going to happen. And this was a proponent of the minimum wage increase, but also a very good business person. I believe that that's what elicited that answer. It's exactly what the business community is trying to cry out and say. Listen, if you artificially raise the wages for someone that is not producing what would benefit my company, I'm just going to go pay that money to someone that's going to produce more. You're essentially shoving these entry-level people out of the job market. You're making them unemployed. Who is going to pay for it? Who is going to pay for their unemployment? Who is going to pay for the costs associated with the fact that they no longer have a revenue stream? What burden would they have on our public health and social services side? The government's going to have to pay for that, right? And I'll get to that in a minute, because we've also in this body have been struggling with the reimbursement and the compact impact. And this legislation has a profound effect on that. The main conclusion of more than 7 decades of research is that minimum wage increases tend to reduce employment. One review by several economists as well, David Newmark and William Washer specifically, shows that 63% of studies found relatively consistent evidence of negative employment effects on minimum wages. Further, 85% of that, what they deem the most reliable studies, point to negative employment effects. There's a lot of misconceptions about the minimum wage, and that's a lot of, I believe that was the basis for this bill, that somehow raising the minimum wage will lift families out of poverty. Minimum wage increases failed to alleviate poverty because they failed to address unemployment. They failed to address unemployment. This bill will have the exact opposite effect. It will increase unemployment. It's true that some lower skilled workers living in poorer families that are making minimum wage will see an increase in their income. But that is largely at the cost of those that are going to lose their jobs. So once again, the same people that this bill is trying to help are going to be the ones negatively affected. They're going to pay for it. They're going to pay for it in the form of lost jobs. When have we stopped looking at minimum wage as the entry point for someone without any experience to enter the job market? And why would we arbitrarily set a price point as to what that's worth, as opposed to letting the market and the labor market determine what that should be? Maybe it's because it's election season. I don't know. We talked about studies after studies on the internet. A recent study by the Heritage Foundation concluded that the current proposal before Congress to raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 to $10.10, which was the original version of this bill, or at least what was alluded to, would likely eliminate an estimated 300,000 jobs per year and lower the national gross domestic product by an average of $40 billion per year in the U.S. In Guam, we have a much, much smaller economy. We have a very finite market in which several businesses compete for that market. When we talk about a 14% increase in wages, I would be amazed, and I would consider those businesses that do make a 14% profit margin one of the lucky businesses. Because on Guam, the business community deals with very slim margins, finite markets, a lot of competition. That puts a lot of pressure on prices and companies to be competitive. 14% increase, the retiring speaker says, what's the big deal? It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. And that's why during the public hearing you saw so many business leaders come out and voice their opposition, because it'll put some people out of business, especially the smallest of them, the mom and pop stores. Those that are paying their employees minimum wage right now. Consider the effect of a 14.6% or 14% increase on their payroll. You talk about economists. Milton Friedman, one of the very prominent and well-known economists, was quoted as saying, what this, and in actuality, what this bill, or what increasing or trying to arbitrarily set the minimum wage at, is what you are doing is to assure that people whose skills are not sufficient to justify that kind of wage will not be employed. We keep going back to this, the effects of raising the minimum wage and what ramifications it will have on employment. What you are doing is to assure that people whose skills are not sufficient to justify that kind of wage will not be employed. Minimum wage law is most properly described as the law saying employers must discriminate against people who have low skills. If I had 2 applicants, Madam Speaker, that walked into my office, and I'm going to choose which one I'm going to pay $8.25 an hour, and one had no skills, and one had read an Excel workbook and knows the basics of Excel the day before, I'm going to hire that person. And that person that has no skills at all is going to wind up on the unemployment line. Which I should add, Madam Speaker, our island's unemployment is at 10%. This time last year, our island's unemployment rate was 14.6%. Once again, it goes back to this bill does nothing to address unemployment. That's the crux of the problem. Job opportunities, not higher wages, just job opportunities. Most employers in our island will gladly pay anybody more than minimum wage with a higher skill set. It could be as simple as driving a truck. It could be as simple as spending 2 hours down at our public library learning how to use Excel. If somebody walked into our office today and said, I know how to use Excel, they would easily make more than minimum wage. And all they would have to do is go to the public library and study the book. Even if employers do not decrease hiring, they will respond to higher labor costs by replacing the lowest skilled individuals with more highly skilled individuals. You know, we talk about we talk about our youth, we talk about our education system and some of the inability for even our high school students to get a GED or to even pass. What job prospects are you setting them up for? The effects on unemployment are even more pronounced for minority youth. A 10% increase in the minimum wage decreases minority employment by 3.9%, with the majority of the burden falling on the minority youth, whose employment levels will decrease by 6.6%. And I want to just spend a quick moment on this, Madam Speaker, because just think conceptually of what would happen if you raised the minimum wage as this bill proposes. What would happen? How would Guam look? How would Guam's labor market look to one of our FAS friends abroad? Would they see that as an attractive wage that would warrant immigration to our island? Think of the effects. We've already struggled with getting properly reimbursed with our compact impact. What effect would that have if our neighbors and friends from Saipan, from any of the FAS states, if they chose to come to Guam and seek of a lucrative, what this bill purports, a lucrative wage of $8.25, what would they be faced with? They will not be faced with employment opportunities because, once again, it does nothing to address unemployment. But what will our government be faced with? Once again, it goes back to the question, who will pay for it? Madam Speaker, once again, increasing the minimum wage will hurt the exact people it is meant to help. The problem plaguing Guam's poor is not low wages, but rather a shortage of jobs. 10% unemployment now, 14.6% unemployment last June. And it wasn't because we had a rash of job increases. These people fell out of the labor market. They stopped pursuing jobs. They didn't get employed. With local unemployment still hovering around 10%, increasing the minimum wage would make it more difficult for emerging businesses to expand payrolls and for existing businesses to maintain employees. Further, a higher wage rate would make it more difficult for individuals with less education and experience to find work. Raising the minimum wage favors those who already have jobs at the expense of the unemployed. Public policy would be more beneficial if it lowered barriers to entry for employment and increased economic opportunities. Raising the minimum wage may be a politically attractive policy option, but it's harmful to the very people policymakers intend to help. And I want to go back, Madam Speaker, to the question of who's going to pay for it. Let's just go through some of the quick potential for those that are going to fund it. Who will pay for it? Those most likely to pay for it are those this bill intends to help. We've already reiterated that. They will pay for it, Madam Speaker, in the form of lost opportunities and lost jobs. They will pay for it in the form of lost hours. A 1 hour reduction in their costs would fully fund their increase. That's how an employer thinks. It's how am I going to pay for it? If you increase it by $1 an hour and they work 8 hours, I'll reduce that employee's hours by 1 hour. The net effect, they don't make any more. They will pay for it, Madam Speaker, by replacing that person with someone that has higher skills, that are more productive. If I can get more productivity out of a person that has a little bit more skill set than someone that's entry level, I'm going to hire that person. Madam Speaker, they'll pay for it by the erosion of the buying power due to increased costs. Costs are going to go up. That is just the evolution of how prices are determined for products or services that are offered. Businesses take a look at what it costs them to do business, and they adjust prices accordingly. They're not a charitable organization. They're not a nonprofit organization. They're in the business to make money and to employ people, because ultimately they can't survive if they don't. Who will pay for it? Those who are already employed. Raising the minimum wage increases the cost to the employer that they would otherwise use to raise existing employee salaries and benefits. If I had to determine whether or not I can afford to fire someone, let's say a minimum wager, and I can't because I need that person in my operation because they do have a place and they are productive, that prevents me from increasing my other employees who have been with me for a long time. It prevents me from increasing their wages. It prevents me from increasing their benefits. A lot of people don't talk about the benefits. They don't talk about the 2 weeks that many of the employers on the island give to their employees off for vacation. Those employed will pay for it in the form of lost or decreased benefits, as I reiterated. Those employed will pay for it in the form of increased prices that this increase would have. We talked a lot about, or the retiring speaker talked about the consumer price index. Guess what? This will have a direct correlation with it. Increase in minimum wage and the CPI is going to go up as well. Who will pay for it, Madam Speaker? The government of Guam, this body who appropriates money every year, will pay for it. They will pay for it in the form of decreased corporate taxes, less revenue on the revenue stream that we get to appropriate for all the expenses of the government. The government of Guam will pay for it in the form of lost GRT and payroll taxes as the smallest of our businesses go out of business. Who will pay for it? With the increase in unemployment, how will the government support some subsistence programs, MIP? We talked earlier in the session about our hospital and their ability to collect. Well, Madam Speaker, you know, you hear the analogy of you can't squeeze blood out of a stone. That couldn't be any more true in this scenario. What happens when we see an increase in immigration here in the pursuit of employment at $8.25 an hour, only to arrive here and realize there's no jobs? Okay, well, we're here now. What are we going to do? I need to go to the hospital. Let's go to the hospital. I can't pay for it. Therefore, who's going to pay for it? The government of Guam, the residents of Guam. Madam Speaker, if you could just give me 1 second, I want to pull up some questions that if the author could yield. Because in examining the committee report, you know, nowhere in the committee report does this study talk about the inducement for greater immigration from the CNMI and the freely associated states of Guam to avail themselves of this potential Guam higher wage. Of the study that was conducted by the retiring speaker, how many Guam businesses were surveyed in the study? What questions were asked of these businesses? Were they just asked point blank, what would you do? And was that taken into consideration? At the end of the last federal minimum wage increase over 3 years from $5.15 to $7.25, national unemployment went up over 15%. Now I know that the retiring speaker used his own data and how it related to on Guam. But still, you cannot ignore this statistic. Has the study done anything on Guam's unique economic demographics regarding the impact on local unemployment? Once again, it goes back to, did you ask the businesses what they're going to do? And was that taken into consideration? Madam Speaker, I've said enough. The last thing I'll say, and I'll reiterate as I've done throughout this testimony, is that Who is going to pay for it? I've already given you several different scenarios. And coming from the business community, I can attest to the fact that many of these, if not all, are true. Someone is going to pay for it. This bill does nothing to address how it will be paid for. And unfortunately, the 7,840 people it purports or assumes it will assist, it assumes it will help, will be the very people that will pay for it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Senator Nicholas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I first want to start out by thanking the author of the legislation, who he's been through a lot in this whole process. We forget that he's a retired Chief Justice. We forget that he spent his whole life having to look at evidence. And it's unfortunate that in an issue where there are naturally going to be philosophical differences, we would all of a sudden discount how important something like evidence would be to a man like that. And I just wanted to thank him for being willing to go through everything that he has gone through up to this point, because it's not easy. You know, the statement was made, oh, maybe it's for votes and it's an election year. Look, the reality is that minimum wage workers are not the best of voters. That's the reality. They're working 3 part-time jobs. They don't get a day off to go vote. We're lucky if they go to the polls. This isn't about votes. It's about what kind of an island do we want to see and what kind of an island do we want to create. And I'm of the mind that we need to balance it. Absolutely, we need to balance it. I would also like to thank those members in the private sector who approach this issue with a sense of decency, because there has been some indecency. And I'd like to thank those who remain decent and rational, because in the end, we all call this island our home, and we're going to have to continue to work together. And I would as much like to continue to push for pro-business policies as I would like to continue to push for pro-people policies, because I believe that in this small community, it's all interrelated, much more pronounced than in much larger communities. I want to also thank the author of the legislation for being willing to compromise down to a $1 increase first. You know, I mean, after all that he's been through, he could stick his head in the sand and say, you know what, if this really is for votes, or if it's really about politics, he can just try and make a political point. But that's not what it's about. It's about the minimum wage worker. And I'd like to talk about the minimum wage worker. Who is the minimum wage worker? We haven't even talked about that. Who is this person earning minimum wage? As much as we have statistics and numbers and dollars and cents, we're talking about people. So who is the person earning the minimum wage? In the hearings, I could only take so much of it because there were some really, really cruel things said by some business owners. And mind you, they're not the perspective of all business owners. I know a lot of very good, decent business owners, but some said some things that were just horrendous. An absolute horror. To say that the only reason why people would want to make more at minimum wage is to buy more beer. That's horrendous. That's somebody who's completely out of touch with the struggles of the working poor. And you know, Madam Speaker, when this whole issue of the minimum wage came up, I was really conflicted. I mean, I have a lot I fall somewhere in the middle of where the perspective is of the retiring speaker and the perspective is of the person who introduced the legislation, definitely somewhere in the middle. And, you know, I prayed a lot and did a lot of my own research, and then I got invited to this science fair judging up at one of our elementary schools during this whole process. It was immediately after the hearings on the minimum wage. And when I went to the science fair, I saw all these little kids, elementary kids, sitting down proudly with their poster boards. And you could see that only had maybe 1 or 2 crayons to write their project. All you had to do was look at their shoes. They're all wearing uniforms, so it's hard to tell. But if you look at their shoes, someone had to make a choice between shoelaces and crayons. The minimum wage worker isn't just a statistic or a number. It isn't just a cost center or a profit opportunity. It's a person. Some of them are college students trying to pay their way through school. Some of them are working right out of high school because they got a sick parent to take care of. Some of them are very enterprising and they want to work. They want to work to be able to get some money in while they're going to school and doing all these things. I know a lot of people like that too. Some are very old people who are trying to earn a little bit more to make up for their inability to keep up with the rising cost of living. Social Security is not enough for them. They got to go and stand and be a security guard somewhere. You know, I heard that old people make the best security guards because they need the least amount of sleep. I mean, those are some of the hard realities out there that float around. Our minimum wage worker is a parent who got pregnant young and chose to keep the baby. And now they're holding 3 jobs down, trying to make life different and better for their little one. Takes away from family time, but they do what they got to do. And so when we go from the discussion of being $10.10 down to a single dollar, for all of that, $1. Can we do that? Is that too much to ask? Let's just do $1 and see how we go. Are we going to lose all these jobs? Is the economy going to all of a sudden grind to a halt? If it does, guess what? We raised it. We can lower it back down. That's the advantage of us doing it this way versus the feds putting it on us, because we can't change it when the feds do it. But we can do it, we can watch it, we can monitor it, we can be responsible about it. And if it does turn out to be the absolute worst thing that we could have ever imagined, we can always go back. But what we can't go back on, is the time that's lost when that minimum wage worker could have made $1 more and could have put more money into the kids' science fair project, or put shoelaces on the shoes that would have definitely held it together. When we're talking about the quality of life of our people, the most devastating and degrading element is the passage of time, because that's every second, every minute, every hour of their quality of life not being what it probably could have been. And so we need to take all that, because those are all very heavy things. The state of our economy, the quality of life of our people, the children who are being taken care of by minimum wage workers, or the sick parent, or the old person. Those are all very heavy things. And there isn't a bad person in this hall who doesn't think about all of those things. We all care. We all do. And we have philosophical differences as to how and how much. But $1, I think that's something we can work with. I really do. I think that it's fair. And the question was raised, well, what about talking to business owners and members of the business community? I did have those conversations, some of them with very labor-intensive operations. And I asked them, how do you feel about this? And they say, we can manage. We can manage. And I'm like, how are you going to manage? I really want to know. And they say, maybe we're going to put off increases in other areas. Maybe prices will have to change. We'll really need to step back and look at it to see exactly how things turn out, because more pay does equal more consumption. Maybe there'll be more people going to these establishments. Business owners do not have linear options. It's not, okay, the cost of labor went up, so I'm going to reduce the amount of labor that I have. It doesn't work that way. When your cost centers go up, you look and you figure out exactly how you're going to compensate for it, and you have multiple options. And this is what makes businesses successful. The really smart business owner is going to be able to manage the situation with various tools, not just linear tools, labor costs go up, cut labor. Because the reality is that every business out there, especially the smart ones and the successful ones, they don't hire people just because the minimum wage is low. They hire the labor they need. And just because somebody's going to go out and get more skills doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden going to get paid more either, because it's all about supply and demand. If everybody on the island knows Excel, then everybody's going to get paid minimum wage with the skills of Excel. So there's all these kind of balancing and compensating factors that go into the equation. But I really believe in the ingenuity of our businesses. And I believe that if we were to give a little increase to our minimum wage workers, we would see ingenuity arise from them as well. They'd take that small amount of money, and God willing, they'd do something to invest themselves with it. Maybe we will get more people on Excel. That'd be a great thing. Or maybe they're going to take that extra money and they're going to say, you know what? I'm working 3 jobs. I'm going to probably work 2 now so I can spend more time with my child. Or maybe they'll take that extra money and buy more crayons for that science fair project. Maybe there's a lot of kids who didn't even enter the dang thing because they didn't have the resources to. How are we going to lift up this community when an entire segment of our population is having to make those kind of choices? Now, we must be balanced about this. We cannot just get all swept away in the passions of it. I was very, very concerned about the original proposal. I had a lot of reservations, but this is something that I can accept. And I firmly believe that with the exception of a few who may be just militant and anti-minimum wage increase period, I think we're going to see the same kind of muted response from our business community. Certainly there's not going to be a celebration, but there's definitely going to be a reasonable and rational reaction. And that's what we need to strive for. Guam is small enough for us to achieve that. This brinksmanship and this extremism, not very healthy. But I'm incredibly appreciative for the author of the bill. After all he's been through, to still be willing to move us forward somehow. Let's move forward somehow. That's an amazing thing. You know, the question was asked over and over again, who is going to pay for this? And I mean, just as the solution on increasing costs is not linear, so too is the solution on finding out how it's going to be funded is not linear as well. Our consumers here on this island are actually multifaceted. We have local consumers, our local people, all of whom include our minimum wage workers. We also have transient consumers, tourists, who come to the island and visit the island, but they're not calling the island home. Who's going to pay for this minimum wage increase? In one particular industry where we obviously have a lot of people on minimum wage because the average base salary is so low, that industry pays its employees, as spoken about by the Vice Speaker, at about $8.79 an hour right now. Which means that you take your highest paid employee, your lowest paid employee, you average it all out, and it comes out to $8.79, which means you have a lot of people on minimum wage. So this increase is going to affect their bottom line. But fortunately, this industry does 99% of its business with our transient consumers, our tourists. So if there is any cost that need to get passed on, it can get passed on to our tourists. And so the question becomes, are we going to cripple and collapse the tourism industry over $1? Hawaii raised their minimum wage at $10.10. We always try and look at Hawaii and try to mimic what it is that Hawaii is doing, trying to achieve and get to that level. Their room rates are much higher. Their minimum wage is also going up a great deal more. So we're still going to be the cheaper destination. Our operating costs are going to be lower. But there's another element to it. Because when you ask who's going to pay for it, you could pass 100% off to your consumers, or you could try to make it work within your margins. And that's what's getting lost in this whole conversation. There's a margin. It's not just the cost of doing business and the revenue, it's net profit. How much does the business make at the end of the day? And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of profits. I think anything that we can do to get our local businesses profitable is a good thing. But you can also pay for your operating expenses from your profit margins. And so when we have revenues of $7 billion and operating costs of $3.3 billion, we have very healthy margins. Very healthy margins. And maybe some margins are more healthy in some industries than in others, but that's something that we need to really factor in and take into consideration. Because as it was mentioned by the author of the legislation, every single dollar that's going into this increase in the minimum wage is going to go to local consumption. It's going to go to local consumption. And that brings me all the way back to the consumers and the kinds that we have. You see, our economy does have a lot of fluctuations, but those fluctuations are volatile because of the transient consumers that we have. If something goes wrong in an external economy, it's going to affect the number of tourists that we get here. There's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is we can increase our local consumer base. The more local consumers we have, the more we smooth out economic volatility on this island. And the more we smooth that out, the better it is for businesses all around. Because when volatility is reduced, the ability to plan and project is improved, the ability to invest in your business is improved because you're able to say, you know what, my volatility and my revenue is reduced. I can probably earmark this much more for growth. So those are one of the things, Madam Speaker, that I like for us to be able to keep in mind. You know, those are the kind of things that are affecting our entire community. Now, the question of how does the minimum wage address unemployment, how they say it does nothing to address unemployment, I think it does a tremendous amount to address unemployment. Because when the wage to start working is less than the benefits to not work at all, why am I going to go out and get a job at all? Sometimes the ability to earn more actually makes you want to go to work. I think that's a natural occurrence. But if the benefits far outweigh the labor, I mean, Madam Speaker, anybody listening, and I'm sure people in this room, we know people who probably tried working and then stopped because it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth holding down a minimum wage job and losing those benefits. So if we can make work more attractive, that's something that we need to continuously strive for. But again, we need to be balanced in all of this. We need to be balanced so that we're not harming our economy. And this compromise that's been proposed by the Vice Speaker for just $1 for that minimum wage worker and whoever it is they work for, that's something that we can probably do. And if it doesn't work at all, if it's so bad for the island, we can always undo it. But let's always strive to not only look after our economy and grow, but to make sure that it's going to benefit our people. We need to grow and we need to benefit our people. You cannot have one without the other, especially on this island of Guam. So let's give this a shot, I say. I think it'll be a good thing. I think that we'll be okay. And again, I look forward to working very closely with all facets of the community so that we can make sure that this was the right thing to do. But at the very least, with respect to shoelaces and crayons and science projects and sick parents and manamkus working and college students working, I really think that $1 is something that we can consider. Another point that was brought up, Madam Speaker, and I'll be brief, is the hospital. And the fact that, you know, we have so many people who are going there who are not paying. That is one of the questions that was asked, and that's one of the answers. Who is going to pay for it? When wages aren't enough to go pay your medical bill, who pays for it? The people of Guam pay for it because they go to the hospital and they go get these medical services and they don't pay for it. So let's try and strike that balance. I think that we can do it. I think that we have a very reasonable approach that I cannot reiterate enough. I'm just so impressed by the Vice Speaker. And it's something I can get behind and support. And it's something that we'll definitely monitor closely. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, there being none, Mr. Vice Speaker, you want to close? You want to send it down? Mr. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I just want to address one thing. The fear of the great migration here for increased wages. Admittedly, the research was done by my office, but the statistics that I'm going to quote were from the state of Hawaii and they're at the government websites that produce these studies. And we can compare, talk about tourism sites. Based on national and state labor statistics, the mean hourly wage for a desk clerk at a hotel or motel is $8.75 higher in Hawaii and $2.92 higher in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It's not $8.75 an hour in Hawaii, Madam Speaker. A desk clerk makes $8.75 an hour more. The mean hourly rate for food prep worker, server is $4.22 higher in Hawaii and $2.14 higher in the Virgin Islands. If they're going to go anywhere, Hawaii would be a better place because you'd be making what would be equal to 2 people rather than 1. And I just want to close, Madam Speaker, by quoting something. A couple of us, earlier last month, were fortunate enough to attend the Vindi Honor, which is celebration of the Philippine Independence Day. And at that reception, letters were read from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Vice President of the Philippines, and the President Aquino. And I'd just like to read the letter that was sent by the President of the Philippines. And this is addressed to all the overseas Filipinos. Over the recent past, our nation has been making great strides towards economic progress. Even amidst such growth, however, there remains a concern that many Filipinos still live in poverty. I have always reiterated that for our progress to have meaning, we must be able to share our economic gains with the poor who will stand to benefit most from it. We've regained our freedom and liberty as a nation. Now we must strive to perfect such independence for our people. Our war now is not against external oppressors, but against poverty, which for years has been the benevolent spirit haunting our people. If we are to be truly free, we must provide the poor with the main means to be able to live meaningful lives. And with that, Madam Speaker, I close. And I ask that Bill 316 be sent down to the voting file.
On the motion to send 316-32 to the third reading file without any objections, so we'll recess until 2 this afternoon.